Hello and welcome to War of Words. The major election manifestos are now public documents, and today we ask, what sort of promises do they contain? What does that tell us about the parties? And beyond that, what picture emerges of Indian democracy? That's with Abhishek Singhvi of the Congress Party, Nilotpal Basu of the Communist Party Marxist, Sudhindra Kulkarni of the BJP, the author and commentator Prem Shankar Jha, and the well-known political analyst and psephologist Yogendra Yadav. Sudhindra Kulkarni, let's start with the BJP's promise of 35 kilos of rice or wheat every month to each BPL family at a cost of just rupees 2 a kilo. You made precisely the same promise in Karnataka. 2 budgets have passed, but you haven't implemented it. So is this a credible commitment or deliberate delusion?
It's a very credible and solemn commitment. You mentioned Karnataka, but I would like to mention here that in Chhattisgarh, we have actually implemented it, and implemented it so well that Chief Minister Dr. Raman Singh has come to be known as Chawal Baba.
Can I then ask, why has it not been implemented despite 2 budgets in Karnataka?
It's just about a year that we have been in office in Karnataka, and we are certainly going to implement it. Let me also tell you that Dr. Atal Bihari Vajpayee's government had introduced a similar scheme, Antyodaya Anna Yojana. This is a far more improved version of that, because we believe that right to food, especially for the poor, is a fundamental right, and political parties, governments have a moral constitutional duty to secure food security for the poor.
Abhishek Singhvi, Pranab Mukherjee ridiculed the BJP promise, but the truth is that the Congress manifesto promises 25 kilos of wheat or rice at 3 rupees a kilo. Yours is no less populist, it's just that the BJP is more successfully so.
No, Karan, imitation is the best form of flattery, and we are flattered that the BJP has really copied us on this.
Then why ridicule them? Why ridicule them?
No, we have ridiculed the copying, not the idea. We have ridiculed the copying. I'll tell you why. Apart from this copying and apart from the Karnataka point which you made, this is an issue, a larger issue of food security. You can't just give 35 kilograms or 10 kilograms at X rupees. You have to generally see food security. Look at the holistic thing which we have done. We have not just doled this out or promised this out. We have the NREGA with 3.5 crore jobs that gives food security. We have loan waiver that enhances purchasing power. We have 8.5% growth, enhances rural purchasing power, and we have the largest ever program of agricultural credit. So the idea is a holistic thing. Along with that, and we intend to enact now, if we come back to power, the Food Security Act.
If food security is the intention, then is the BJP offering better security by offering 10 kilos more at 1 rupee less?
That's the point. That's precisely the point. It is not a game of competitive populism. Ask 2 questions. Is their program holistic, or is just we offer 10 kilograms, you offer 35? Number 2, did you do any of the 5 things itemized in your 5 years? From 90 to 2004, never, not one of them. Last, you can't promise it. You have to have the money. I can promise you free rice and free
that point,
we need to work out the scheme which is holistic.
On that point, I have to, in fairness, point out that yours is as much of a promise as theirs is a promise. We don't know whether either of you will deliver. No one can claim greater credit on delivery. Let me bring in Mr. Basu. The interesting thing, Mr. Basu, is that the CPM manifesto does not contain a comparable promise at all. Is that because you think such promises are irresponsible, or you think they're unaffordable, or did you simply fail to think of them?
On the contrary, it is very important, but what we feel that these schemes are better executed if they are done at the state level, as we are doing in the states where we are there in office. In West Bengal it is there, in Kerala it is there, in Tripura it is there, and importantly.
But you don't think the national government needs to make such a promise?
Nationally, what we have put is very, very clear. First of all, our public distribution system needs to be universalized, because this whole notion of poverty line and the way it is calculated, it is against the poor in the country. As you will see from the report of the Arjun Sengupta committee, that our 78% of the population, that is about 83 crores of people, are having to spend and live on 20 rupees a day, and there in the name of BPL there is actually an attack on a large majority of the people. Therefore what we think that there has to be a universal PDS system. For example, right now there is an excess of 1 1.5 crore metric ton of food which is rotting in our godowns, but the
Let me
government
stop you there.
refuses.
Let me stop you there.
Refuses to give it to the state government.
You're concentrating on universalizing the PDS rather than guaranteeing a particular offtake of rice and wheat at a particular price. Let me bring in Prem Shankar Jha, and let me ask you, Prem Shankar Jha, whether in cost terms these are justifiable promises. The Hindustan Times has done a costing. It says that the Congress offer will cost the exchequer 9,700 crore. The BJP offer will cost 21,000 crore. Now, at a time of economic slowdown, in your eyes, is this wise spending, or given the ballooning fiscal deficit, is it reckless?
I think that this kind of an offer is populist. The quantum of populism is really reflected by the amount that you're offering. Let's not look at the money part of it. That is very misleading. But look at the quantities. At 35 kgs a week, a month per family, you need about 18 million tons. Now, there's a world of difference between 18 million tons and about 5 to 6 million tons, which is 10 kgs a month. Now, 18 million tons will exhaust 70% of the entire procurement in a good year, and about 90% or 85% in a poor year. The procurement itself has now become a system by which the whole market price is raised up across the country, particularly, in order to satisfy the farmers in the food surplus countries. Lastly, if you look at the performance of the food deficit countries in distributing the BPL food grains, it is abysmal.
Okay.
I mean, in fact, over the entire period, just one more thing, over an entire 20-year period ending about 2005, not more than 50% of the total amount of food that was allocated to the food deficit states was ever distributed, and the worst sufferers were the BPL families.
So very quickly, can I just interrupt and say very quickly, what you're saying is that this is not an economically sustainable offer. Is that what you're saying?
Not only is it not, it is not, 35 kgs is not economically sustainable. 10 kilos is, provided that it is distributed. What is not happening today is the state governments are not even bothering to distribute.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yogendra Yadav, do such sops, if I can borrow the term that the press has popularized, influence the way BPL voters, just to look at them specifically, actually vote? Or is their voting determined by issues other such as caste or regional and not manifesto promises?
Karan, it's not at all clear if manifesto promises mean very much to the people directly, but it does contribute to an overall image of the party. Now, in a democracy where majority are poor, politics and electoral democracy has to be seen to be doing things for people who get nothing from the system otherwise. You have two options. Either you improve the system in which people get better deliveries in general, or you come up with short-term ad hoc measures where you visibly give something to those who get nothing otherwise. I don't oppose what you call populist measures in general, because if that's the only thing poor can get out of this democracy, they might as well get it. I clearly do not approve of that notion of democracy in which only stock market holders are shareholders in democracy, or only those who give income tax are the only ones contributing in a country. It has to be much larger, but of course Prem Shankar Jha and others are right that if these things are delivered via a system that is much better than these short-term ad hoc and direct measures, which you see somewhat more in the BJP's manifesto, it's not entirely clear if they have thought carefully about having to implement it.
Okay, let me pick up on the first point Yogendra Yadav made. Sudhindra Kulkarni put it to you. He says that the important thing about manifestos is that they create an image and an impression of the party. Now, I notice that the single most expensive manifesto promise made by the BJP is your commitment to exempt income up to 3 lakhs in the case of men, up to 3.5 lakhs in the case of women and senior citizens from income tax. And this has been costed by the Hindustan Times to cost 25,000 crore, but it will only benefit at the best 3.25 crore people, given, as Mr. Basu told you, that 80% of India lives on just 20 rupees a day. Should a national party focus on such a small minority?
Karan, if you look at our manifesto, it addresses the concerns, legitimate concerns of every section of society. It's not just the 3 crore middle class people that we are addressing. Food security is for BPL families, and on the point of food security, we have in fact introduced an innovation of food coupons.
But stick to what I now raised.
Yeah,
Is it
I'll
fair
come
to
to that
spend
point.
25,000 on just 3.25 crore people?
See, here is a government in the past 5 years. Bimal Jalan. I'll come to the point.
Answer you.
No, I'll come to the point, Karan. You see, here we are. Past 5 years have seen an enormous widening of rich-poor divide, in which even the middle class has suffered.
Okay.
Economic recession, price rise, job losses. Why shouldn't we give some succor to the middle classes?
All right. That's a fair point. In contrast, there's not a word in the Congress manifesto about taxation whatsoever. Is that because you believe that the widespread complaints of the middle class about taxation are unjustified and unfounded, or have you decided that the middle class aren't going to vote for you, so why give them tax advantages?
Neither, Karan. Everything can't be stated in a manifesto. A manifesto
What's the point
is a
of the
broad.
manifesto then?
No, everything can't be stated. You can't cover every sector, every small thing.
tax is
the
so
difference is no. Just let me answer. The difference is that we have done much of what they merely promise. Now just compare. I'm answering the question about what we've done. There is unfortunately not only an element of copying but of hypocrisy and insincerity in their manifesto. In income tax, you asked, 40,000 to 50,000 is what they did in their first budget, and then they slept and forgot about it during their 6 years. We have increased, actually done it from 50,000 to 1,50,000.
You're not answering my question.
3 times.
Are you or not going to offer tax concessions to the middle class, or do you think
We
it's not worth doing?
we believe that this is a budgetary exercise for that year's budget. It doesn't have to be stated in the manifesto. Of course, if the budget of that particular year when we are in power requires us to consider factors which justify it, yes, we are not averse to it at all. And the middle class, without the middle class, do you think we would have won the election last time? We very much want to win with them this time as well.
I'm sure you do. You want to win with everyone, I hope, not
Yes.
just a particular
Yes.
class. Mr. Basu, on the subject of tax, what your manifesto says could be deemed to be actually rather frightening. You want to restore long-term capital gains tax. You want to increase securities transaction tax. You want to increase wealth tax. You want to introduce inheritance tax, and you want to end tax concessions for corporates. Why should people who pay tax want to vote for you?
You see, in high growth India, it is the Aam Admi who have suffered. Because when you were, and Mr. Jha was also expressing concern over fiscal profligacy, you are not talking of the amount of tax unrealized. You are not talking of the tax bonanza. In only this ACZ Act which the government promulgated and about which we had problems, 1 lakh crore is going to be go down the drain, and this entire approach of at the time of an economic recession to talk about addressing social concerns, infrastructure development, social sector needs, but at the same time promising tax waiver, we think is a atrocity, and therefore those sections of the people who can afford to pay more taxes, why should they not pay more taxes?
All right, let me bring in Prem Shankar Jha. Prem Shankar Jha, the issue when it comes to taxation is to do with the middle class primarily. Is it right that parties should seek to win the middle class vote, which may not be much more than, as I said, 3.25 crore, by handing out tax benefits of 25,000 crore? Or by being completely silent and saying that we leave this to the budget, which means that you refuse to take a position at all, which is the Congress position?
No, I think that we are, again, let's not get caught in the trap of numbers. The important thing is there has been inflation. We are at this moment happily, nobody's talked about the fact that for 19 million civil servants you get automatic 100% compensation, not Mr. Basu, not everybody else, but there are a whole lot of other people precisely in this middle class managerial group who in fact have had their real incomes go down. And I'm not just talking about managers, I'm talking about stenographers. I'm talking about even better paid drivers and workers. Agreed, it's the organized sector. Agreed, the organized sector is only a small part of total thing. This should be part and parcel of everyday government. Why is it being treated as a giveaway? One more thing I must say. if you are going to do anything at all about widening income gaps, why is no one talking about taxing dis-saving? In fact, and taxing grotesquely bad consumption, overspending, overconsumption, which is not taxed after you paid your 25% or so of tax, net tax.
In other words, you're talking of a luxury consumption tax. You're talking of a luxury consumption tax.
No, not at all. Karan, it's very simple. Allow me to explain. All you do is add one little section to your Income Tax Act and say any decline in your savings during the current year will be taxed. End of story.
Let me bring in Yogendra Yadav. Let me put this to you, Yogendra Yadav. Do the middle classes respond to tax SOPs? Because it's not just the income tax paying middle class, we're also talking about the defense services who may be exempted altogether. Do people respond to tax when they make up their mind how to vote?
There's no evidence to suggest that these measures of any kind get your votes in the very short run. But as I said, it's all about an overall image. And the thing that should worry the BJP is that the overall image that you get through their manifesto about who the ordinary person is who they are trying to address is that of a middle class. Now, the point is not that you give them one thing or what the cost of that is, but if that theme recurs in what appears to be the youth for you, what is education for you, what is women for you, then this should be something that ought to worry a national party.
All right, I know that Sudhindra Kulkarni wants to jump in and defend the BJP, but I want to take a break first and I want to come back and raise the issue of reservations and then tie that with what we've discussed already on taxation and ask perhaps at that point, are the parties projecting the right image of themselves or have they fallen into a promise trap? We'll be back in a moment's time. See you after the break. Welcome back to What Are Words. We're discussing the major political manifestos. Let's now, gentlemen, take up the sort of reservations different parties are offering. And let's start with you, Abhishek Singhvi. Congress has committed itself to reservations for the economically weaker sections of all communities. In addition, you're also going to adapt on a nationwide level reservations in government employment and education for minorities, as is being practiced in Kerala, Karnataka and Andhra. This is bound to breach the Supreme Court's 50% Lakshman Rekha. How are you going to tackle that?
Karan, let me tell you that the major constitutional amendments on this subject, almost all of them, Article 15, Article 16, have been done by the Congress. So we have an all India approach. Now Balaji's rule on 50% is well known. Nobody can change it unless the Supreme Court deals with it. Nevertheless, you have exceptions to it, you have interpretations of it. You and I both know that for several decades in Tamil Nadu, the reservation figure is running at 60-65% de facto. Now the Balaji rule still stands. So we are not saying that we will go and breach the rule. We are saying that we will propose this within the existing system. Now to what extent we have to work out a compromise will depend on the details, because this part of it, the economically weaker sections part of it, has not been done before.
The interesting thing is that the manifesto doesn't say what you are saying now, which is the extent to which we succeed depends upon the extent to which we can wiggle around and find a compromise.
Naturally, it has to be a matter of compromise, because that's the law of the land. We can't say that we will do something in defiance of the law of the land.
Okay, it's just that it's an important clarification to give the audience that this is a promise or a commitment made conditional upon your capacity to compromise or wiggle. Let me bring in the CPM. The CPM is committed to extending reservations to all Dalit Christians and Dalit Muslims, as well as reservations in the private sector. But why are you excluding Christians and Muslims from OBC reservations? That was, after all, one of the most important Sachar committee proposals, and you're a great defender of implementing the Sachar committee, yet you've left that out.
No, we have made very clear that the problem of delivering whatever is available through this positive discrimination in the form of reservation, the delivery is the major problem. Therefore, thrust of our commitments here you will find, because the present status of even scheduled caste or scheduled tribe getting the advantage of reservation.
Are you answering my question?
No, I am answering your question, but let me also clarify. I mean, what is the thrust of our manifesto? I mean,
but clarify it with one specific question in mind. Why have you excluded Christians and Muslims from OBC reservations when you support Sachar committee? You want it implemented, and this is perhaps the most important Sachar committee recommendation.
No, our point is, even in the case of reservation for OBCs, there are so many roadblocks. First, let this be cleared.
Okay.
And already scheduled caste reservation is part of our constitutional framework, and there also the Dalit Christians and Dalit Muslims are not getting advantage of that.
Let me bring you in, Sudhindra Kulkarni. Both Congress and the CPM are extending reservations on religious grounds, and the CPM in addition is extending reservation into the private sector. How strongly opposed to such extension is the BJP? Because these don't feature in your manifesto in any shape or form.
We are totally opposed to reservations on the basis of religion. It is not constitutionally guaranteed. In fact, it violates the principle of the Indian Constitution. I would like to point out, Karan, a very important highlight of our manifesto, and that is extending the benefits of reservations to people on economic criterion, and that will include people of all communities, including the minority communities.
Okay,
that's point number one. There is another very important point that we have made, which many people miss, because we have to recognize that reservations alone cannot guarantee a better economic status to all the Dalits and tribal. We have seen it.
Which is why reservation is not an important part of your manifesto.
No, it is very much an important point. We are saying reservation plus.
Okay.
And that is what we are saying, that we have to create opportunities for entrepreneurship, commerce, trade, promote these among Dalits, tribals, OBCs. This is an important.
I'm not sure why you call that reservation plus. The connection between the plus part and the reservation to me is very tenuous, if at all. But let me bring in Prem Shankar Jha, and let me point this out to you. Mr. Jha, will an extension of reservations above the Supreme Court's 50% level, and will reservations in the private sector in particular affect India's competitiveness? By which I really mean India's economic performance and its desire to grow continually at 9, maybe even 10%.
Karan, this is the very worst form of populism, far worse than the economic parts we were talking about earlier. This is the absolute it exemplifies what Aristotle warned us against, which is the conversion of people ruled by the will of the people into a demagogy, ruled by demagogy. And I'm afraid this is the very worst. Reservations will make this country less and less competitive in a more and more competitive world. It's as simple as that. It militates against getting the best of talent, no matter how it was obtained. Reservation is a political weapon for equalization. It's not an economic way of doing anything. If you want to really improve anything, you must improve education. For 60 years, we have not done special facilities for either the OBCs or the SC/STs to educate them. We've only created reservations. And I think that is not the answer. If the answer is something like the US Head Start program for children from all kinds of minorities, and which they're taken up at the age of 5 and educated, and also combined with affirmative action, which is done on a voluntary basis by all concerned.
Let me bring in Yogendra Yadav, and let me put this to you, Yogendra Yadav. Is extending reservations the best way, or perhaps even the right way, of tackling the disadvantage of minorities and the poor in particular? Could it not spark off the sort of backlash we witnessed when the UPA extended reservations at the university level to OBCs? Isn't that the great danger, that our fragile society could fracture rather than unite over this?
Karan, I don't think the real problem is merit. I don't think the real problem is backlash. These are things which have usually been blown out of proportion. The real problem is that reservation, more reservation, reservation in every sector to every community is not the best way of ensuring social justice. Just one point of clarification though. We need to distinguish between extending reservations to Muslim as a religious community, against which there is a constitutional bar as of now, and extending reservation to Dalit Muslims and Christian Muslims, Christian Dalits, which is possible. And on the question of OBC, I don't know why Mr. Nilotpal Basu did not clarify that. There is simply no bar on including OBC Muslims or Christian, OBC Muslims and OBC Christians into OBC list. Kerala list is full of that.
Absolutely.
The trouble with CPM is that they have actually not done so in West Bengal.
In other words, they haven't lived up to what they say they have done. Let me broaden beyond reservations to also something else that's very important to the poor in India. The promise that you've extended, and I'll start with you first, Abhishek Singhvi, to extend the employment guarantee scheme. Congress is promising 100 days of work at 100 rupees a day to everyone, not just rural India. But you haven't costed that promise. You've given us no sense of what size of actual financial commitment this is. And in the middle of an economic crisis, when government resources are scarce, why haven't you costed it?
Because we did not promise it in the beginning. We have tried out a very large scheme in each of the 596 districts for 3.5 crore employment, and now having tried out the NREGS, we are now proposing for the future to try out for everybody else.
But what's the costing? What's the costing?
Well, that will be worked out only as we go along. It's not that
what do you mean it will be worked out as you go along? Isn't that irresponsible?
No. We do it phase wise. This is not. This first part was limited. Now we have found it successful.
I'm not talking of the first part. I'm talking of a manifesto commitment. If this is a real promise, you must know the cost.
It's a very real promise because we've already done it. No, we've already done it. We are the ones who pioneered it. But we may go 6 months once. We may not do it fully if we don't have it. And one very important
You may not do it if you can't afford it.
Not the whole. We can do it for 3/4 of the country. We can do it for half the country.
Mr. Basu,
let me bring you in
on the same question and issue of extending the employment guarantee scheme. Your party has gone one step further. You've promised to extend it at 100 rupees a day for everyone and for as long as is demanded. In other words, they could demand it all year round, not just 100 days. Yet once again, you've given no costing. And what makes you think India can afford it?
India can afford it very much because again the problem that is faced by the world at large is on the question and the economic downturn is that employment generation has to be a key in overcoming the impact of the economic downturn.
How do you say India can afford it?
And now even the bastions of fiscal conservatism, they are admitting that without increasing public expenditure you cannot come out of this problem.
Forgive me. And let him speak. Answer one small question. How do you know India can afford an extension of the employment guarantee scheme to everyone for as long as they want, which could be all year round?
I am telling you, you are not throwing light on the demand that we have made of bringing the entire money stashed away in Swiss bank.
But you're not going to succeed with that overnight.
No.
But you have to start this on day one.
What I told earlier, also 2 lakh crores of unrecovered tax money is there. When it comes to public expenditure, you raise all these questions.
It's a simple issue I want to put to you. Should manifesto promises of expenditure?
Don't ask me any questions. Hold on a moment. Let me comment on what's been said. Do you mind?
Yeah, go ahead.
Because I find what is going on absolutely despicable. This competitive giveaways. You're promising things to people which you cannot even implement. I can guarantee you they cannot be implemented. The history of 60 years shows that promises have been broken, only to be broken. But you keep doing that until people are fed up and totally cynical. On the other hand, you never ask, no manifesto asks people that, look, this is what we expect of you. Compare the kind of manifestos here with the kind of speeches that are given by American presidents, notably Kennedy, notably Obama, who ask the people to rise at moments of crisis. If you think India is not facing a crisis today, then you must be insane. And I frankly think these people are insane. One last thing. I won't get another chance, so let me just say these and finish with it. One, Swiss banks. Every single thing you do to bring the money back will only drive more money out. And as far as reservations are concerned, the only reservation that's justified is for Muslims, because today, with the end of growth of public sector, organized sector employment, Muslims are now effectively disfranchised.
I
want to bring it. Talking about poor Muslims.
It's unconstitutional to have that. We're not promising anything.
All right, let me bring in Yogendra Yadav. Yogendra Yadav, on this issue of the employment guarantee scheme, I notice, and I'll come to Mr. Kulkarni in a moment's time, but before I do, I'm deliberately coming to you first, that the BJP is almost completely silent. Is that going to be held against the BJP? Or is it the case that those who avail of employment guarantee don't read manifestos and the silence won't matter?
First of all, Karan, let me say I was absolutely shocked to hear this, to read the BJP manifesto's silence on this question, because only a few days ago, there was a public Jansunwai in which both Congress and BJP representatives came. Mr. Prakash Javadekar, the BJP representative, specifically promised in public that NREGA will be extended more than 100 days to every single person, not to families, and will be extended to urban areas as well. And he said this promise will be included in
Imitation
the
is the best form of flattery. I'm flattered.
Okay,
but actually nothing happened. No imitation actually took place. That's sort of not the kind of behavior you would expect from a national party.
I've got Mr. Kulkarni in front of me. He's nodding. I'm not sure whether in agreement with you or with the dissent, but he is smiling at the same time as well. Let me put this to you and then I'll give you a chance to answer. The impression one gets is that you have important tax cuts for the middle classes. You have a complete tax exemption for the defense and paramilitary classes, which I haven't even gone into. But when it comes to employment guarantee for the poor, and remember 80% of India, according to Arjun Sengupta, lives on 20 rupees a day, your manifesto is virtually silent.
We are not silent at all. Let me tell you, there's one way of providing employment through NREGA, but that's not the only way. We need to improve and strengthen rural infrastructure. In the first 50 years of India's independence, Karan, out of 6 lakh villages, 186,000 villages did not have roads.
All right.
Our government, the government of Atal Bihari Vajpayee, started Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana, which has constructed the best rural roads in India's history.
But it hasn't created
roads
employment.
Roads create employment, Karan. Not only the actual construction of roads, but it has a multiplier effect. And that, I think, is a better way of creating employment because it's sustainable.
All right.
Not NREGA.
At least Mr. Javadekar has been proved wrong.
Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana has been languishing under this government.
Don't resort to polemics. You've actually practiced a wonderful restraint. Hold to it for 15 minutes more. We're going to take a break and then we're going to come back and we're going to take a wide overview of manifestos and ask the question, do manifestos matter? Just how well thought out and well considered are these, or are they just catchy promises to buy votes? And finally, what impression does this leave behind of our democracy? That's the last part. See you in a moment's time. Welcome back to War Awards. Now in this last part, we take an overview of Indian political manifestos. Yogendra Yadav, you've studied the manifestos put out by Congress, by the BJP and the CPM. What's your opinion of them? Are they well thought out and well considered documents, or are they just a collection of catchy promises to buy votes?
Karan, that's the impression media wants to put out, but when you read it carefully, I must say in the defense of all the political parties, especially the Congress, BJP and the CPM manifestos, which I looked at very closely, that these manifestos are definitely far more serious than the editorial pages of most of our national dailies. You get a much better picture of this country by reading these and the real issues than you get by watching television in this country. In that sense, it reaffirms my belief that politicians, for all their faults, are still closer to the pulse of this country than intellectuals and media persons are. Having said that, let me register some deep disquiet about things on which there is a deep silence. On the fundamental questions, I'm afraid there is a deep ideological convergence between all the major parties. Agrarian distress is not an issue. You talk about farmers' suicide. The employment crisis of the unorganized sector is not attended to. You can give out a dole, you think of giving some sops. The questions of quality of education and health are simply missing. What you get are numbers of schools, numbers of dispensary, which is not about real quality.
Okay.
The plunder of natural resources is not a question. I wish some of these things were seriously attended, but these kind of things can happen only if people like you do much greater interrogation of the kind that we are doing here.
Prem Shankar Jha, you've heard Yogendra Yadav say that the manifestos of the BJP, the Congress and the CPM are well thought out documents. Let me put a slightly different question to you. Do manifestos, even if well thought out, matter? Because I noticed that when the BJP comes to power, its cardinal principles are actually put on the back burner. And even in the case of Congress, promises for women's reservation in parliament, you know and I know, won't happen if Congress has to depend upon Mulayam and Lalu Yadav. So even if well thought out, do manifestos matter?
Well, the experience that I have had of watching and covering and actually investigating elections as a journalist shows that most people cannot remember vast numbers of promises like this, and have in fact long since become extremely skeptical about what is being promised. They usually tag on to one or two things according to what is closest to their hearts. But the problem with manifestos more generally, I think, is today that I find them out of touch. For example, we keep talking about unemployment in the rural areas. There is employment all the way down. People find some kind of work. You'll be amazed. The actual figures for real unemployment, as shown by the National Sample Survey, are lower than in Europe. It's the quality of employment which is so terrible. And the quality means a degree of security. People are yearning for security, which can only be given by an insurance system. And what we have
I'm stopping you there because we've gone beyond. You're saying that in fact manifestos really don't matter because they often don't address the issues that should be addressed. Let me put this to you, Abhishek Singhvi, first. Look at how opportunistic Congress can be. In 2002, when Amarinder Singh was fighting the Punjab election, he won and he scrapped Badal's policy of free power. 5 years later, when he was fighting to retain his position, he reintroduced the same policy that he'd scrapped. It was a way of deceiving the people. He didn't fool them, he lost. Is such political behavior justified? Because at the end of the day, it's not just opportunistic, it's trying to fool the people.
I think, Karan, you answered your own question. You may be talking of a very specific example. Most responsible parties in the Congress certainly does not do it in the manifesto. A. B. When they did do it, as your example showed, if that is so, I'm not agreeing with everything you're saying, but if that's so, you said yourself, he was not able to deceive. He lost. So if you practice this deception as a policy, it doesn't work. And I think political parties are responsible enough to realize in the long run, there has to be an element of sincerity. And that's where I really fault the BJP manifesto, because I believe there is an element of hypocrisy and lack of sincerity.
Forget the BJP. You're saying honesty is the best policy when it comes to manifestos.
Undoubtedly so.
Surinder Kulkarni, the BJP says that the central plank of its promise to the country's good governance, of the three principles on the cover of a manifesto, it's listed as number 1. Isn't that contradicted by promising tax exemptions to the defense services and the paramilitary, by promising rice at an unsustainable 2 rupees or wheat at an unsustainable 2 rupees? This is bad economics. Good governance and bad economics can't sit together.
Karan, it's not bad economics at all. If we remove hunger from India, it's not bad economics at all, because we are investing in the future of India. It is not unsustainable. We will make it sustainable. But let me tell you, you pointed out good governance. The overarching principle of our manifesto: good governance, development, security. And this is what the people of India today want. And let political parties be judged on the basis of their performance.
You're ignoring what I asked you. Is good governance not contradicted by bad economics?
Not at all. This is not bad economics.
All right.
We maintain it's good economics because we are investing in the people of India, especially the poor people of India.
The CPM manifesto, Nirotpal Basu, suggests that you can spend as much as you want to promise and you can make up for it by taxing the rich. Let me put this to you. How far can you go before you end up killing the goose that lays the golden egg?
Before that, just allow me to make one sentence about Mr. Jogendra Jadav's observation about our conspicuous silence on the question of agrarian crisis, or
very quickly, because we're running out of time. Very quickly.
Yeah, but I think again, you should be equal-handed, in dealing with time. The point is that about agrarian crisis, we have pointed out that it is very unfortunate that people don't talk about land reform, people don't talk about agricultural crisis and the lack of public spending in agriculture, and also the entire unorganized sector. And so far as the point of resource mobilization is concerned, we are very, very confident that if a proper way of addressing resource mobilization is done, you will have a growth with less inequality in this country.
One
which is
sentence.
So in other words, you're saying that the golden goose can carry on laying eggs and they will not stop.
they are not taking the responsibility. Otherwise, how do you
One
find
sentence,
lakhs of
Karavali, one
crores
sentence,
lying in
very
Swiss
quickly.
banks?
Because we are discussing in a structured way, we haven't discussed the basic point. The basic thing which the BJP stands for are three issues. They have to be the core of the manifesto. Why are they not there? 370, Uniform Civil
But
Code.
they are in the
Ram Mandir.
manifesto.
No,
They are in the manifesto.
I'm saying something
They
else.
are in the
I'm saying
manifesto.
something quite different. That is the hypocrisy. They are in the manifesto in writing. But immediately there is always a sentence that we don't intend to implement them. What's the manifesto for then? This is keeping aside your core issues for the sake of greed for power. And this is all for our NDA manifesto.
All right.
They have said they can't
That's
separate
a
NDA
fair
manifesto.
polemical point, but I'm sure there's a lot in your manifesto that you've been promising from Nehru's time onwards that you haven't
No, but
fulfilled.
we haven't said
I
we
don't
promised
want to
to
go
keep it
aside.
aside. We've never said
Let
keep
me
it aside.
begin, Yogendra Yadav, and put this to you, Mr. Yadav. We've all been criticizing competitive populism. Is it really always in a country like India where 80% live on just 20 rupees a day such a bad thing? Even Indira Gandhi's famous Garibi Hatao may not have been achieved by any measure, but it did change the idiom and focus of Indian politics. It focuses the politics on the people who otherwise get forgotten.
As I said, Karan, this is very much fundamental to a country where you have democracy and where majority of the population is very poor. If you need to bring the two together, there would have to be an element of what some economists might find populist.
Okay.
And I find this question very rhetorical about whether India can afford it. I'm sure if India can afford all the bailouts, if India can afford all these defense purchases, then I'm sure India can afford some of these things as well. The only thing is, what is the best method to deliver these things?
All right.
Is reservation the best method, or is something like an equal opportunity commission the best
Absolutely,
method?
and that's an
Is
issue we
giving
went into earlier. Let me
prices-
stop you there. I want to quickly bring in Prem Shankar Jha for a last word. At the end of the day, and remember Mr. Jha, we have only 30 seconds, people look to politicians for sagacity and for responsible attitudes. Is that getting squeezed out in our competitive populist system?
To a very large extent, yes, but not entirely. I do not think the political system is beyond control, but they are killing the goose that lays the golden eggs. They have been doing it for a long time. We are as poor as we are, and we are 127th, notwithstanding everything
Okay.
the Congress has done in the last 5 years. On the Human Development Index, don't forget that.
Very quickly, you wanted a last word, Sudhindra Kulkarni. Very quickly.
You know, it is not just promises. What matters is delivery. Yogendra Yadav pointed out, and critical to delivery is good governance, and the most important thing in good governance is removal of corruption. And
Of
what is
which, by the way, I must point out, you have one solitary sentence on page 44 of your manifesto and
not
nothing
at all,
more.
not at
Literally.
all. You know, you
Literally.
have
And
one.
the camera
Yadav and
You know, there is not
Jaswant
even a
Singh.
Karan, you must give me the.
Yadav and Jaswant Singh on television, and you
Karan,
send it in the
there is not a single word. Corruption doesn't even figure in the Congress manifesto.
All right, and I don't think it figures in the CPM manifesto either. Let's therefore end
I
this
think you
show.
have not read it.
I have read it. Let's end this show by saying that those who talk most about corruption have the least to offer on it in their manifestos, and perhaps there is a telling lesson there. My thanks to Mr. Kulkarni for joining me. My thanks to Abhishek Manu Singhvi, who's licking his lips with anticipation, I see. And my thanks also to Lotpal Basu. And of course, my enormous thanks to Prem Shankar Jha and Yogendra Yadav. And if you have been, thanks for watching. Goodbye. Good night.